Hello, and welcome to another FHIR for Developers tutorial video. My name is Gino Canessa. Today we're going to continue on using profiles, and it's actually going to get mixed in with a lot of validation, so be forewarned. With that said, there's a lot to do, so let's jump right in. I'm here. I've created the GitHub repo already because that's a couple extra steps that have not changed in a while. And I should have probably created the .NET app already, but I figure we can do that here. We'll go ahead and make our source directory and .NET's new console. We'll call it FHIR CS Profiling Basic, and we'll put it in this directory. So before creating this, it had just the standard prep things that I always put in here. So the license file, the git ignore, things like that. So we do now have a source directory and a program.cs. And just to make sure that everything is installed and working correctly, I always like to hello world. Perfect. We run it, just hitting F5 there, and we have our program. So that's a great start. We can go ahead and actually do a couple of things that we know we're going to need for sure. One of them, I always like to, let's see, I'm in source. Perfect. .NET package add system.command line.dragonfruit. And we need pre-release because this is not official yet. But that's just the, oops. There we go. Always swap those around on accident. But Dragonfruit is just the nice command line argument package there. And it's still in alpha technically, just because they can have breaking changes and whatever. But I've been using it here for these kinds of things. Obviously in production you'll have however you like to parse command lines, or if you're doing a GUI app or anything like that. We also know that we're going to need to add, what is it? HL7.FHIR.R4, I believe. There we go. And so now we have FHIR R4. So that gives us some basic stuff we can use. We're going to want system collections generic for sure. We're going to want system.io, I think. And we're going to want FHIR models, and I think we're going to end up using serialization for sure. And we'll have a few more things we need to add here. Let's add in our normal things here to keep the linter from yelling at us. Program to test working with IG's profiles. And same thing here. We want to IGs and profiles. So they match. We do want to get rid of this arguments because that's not what we're going to be doing. Perfect. So to start with, we're going to pick up kind of where we left off last time. We were looking at US core patient and IPS patient. Just for simplicity, I'm going to focus in on US core patient. And the reason why is because it has the profile we want, simple extensions, and complex extensions. And the IPS doesn't have all of the different things. And so I prefer if we just focus in on one just for simplicity here. So, and again, we're just looking here. This is the US core patient. So we can see there's a few things in text, like that each patient must have that we're talking about here. So we can see we are going to have to add these things. There's some must supports, and then there's some things that we can add extra that it defines in there. So we want to kind of play across all of those. To start with, though, we're going to start with the simplest thing we can, which is just, oops, patients. And we're just going to create a patient. Now, if we jump back in here and look at patients, we can see pretty much nothing is actually mandatory. So technically, this patient looks like it would actually pass validation. And that's what brings us to the next, like I said, major topic in here is in FHIR, validating isn't the simplest thing to work with right now. And that obviously, as the product space matures and the specification matures, that will continue to add. But for now, I'll go through a couple of different options so that we can see what those are. And I have actually lost those windows, so we'll just open up a new one. There we go. We'll start with this one because this is a great place to start. So FHIR Validator. So this is the Inferno test tools sponsored by Health IT, US government. It's all open source. You can download this and put it in a Docker image, I believe they have. Lots of things. Make it easy to work with here. The simplest one is just we can paste a resource, and then there's some advanced options so that we can use other implementation guides and profiles and things like that. It knows about a lot of profiles already. They keep it loaded with all of these to make life easier for everyone else. And so that is going to be our simplest one. So let's get what we need for this first, and then we'll continue from there. So we're going to want to serialize this. And so we want a FHIR JSON serializer. Well, we know we're going to need a FHIR JSON serializer settings as we look at autocomplete. Actually, I think we can do those in line. Let's see. It's been a minute. We'll call this serializer equals new FHIR JSON serializer, and then we can do a new serializer settings here. And the only reason we want this is we want pretty printing on. Perfect. So we have our serializer. We can go ahead and make a JSON string, which is serializer.serialize to string, and we'll just pass it our patient. Perfect. So we can do a couple of things here. We can output the file, which we're going to need eventually, and we can print it. So just for testing first, we can do console writeline JSON. And if we hit F5, we should see eventually. There we go. Our very simple resource, which is just saying that it's a patient. But we can also go and go ahead and write this out onto a file. I think that's better. So what we'll do here is add a string patient JSON file name. And we'll start by defaulting that to nothing and add our param, what is this? Patient JSON file name, so that we can get some description here, but we'll output JSON file of patient. Sure, that sounds reasonable. And then we're going to go ahead and put in a check here, so we could add a default here. Obviously, in production code, anything like that, we would want to dynamically find the directory and do all these things. The reality here is that for a quick demo, I'm just going to grab a file name in the directory that I want it to be, so I can check if string is null or empty, patient JSON file name, and then I can set it to this specific directory. So again, this is not a good practice. I want to call that out. It's just for simplicity right now. We'll go ahead and hard code that. So with this, we can go ahead and just do write all text JSON. So let's see. Oh, but it needs two parameters. Got to read what we're doing. First is the path. So we do patient JSON file name, and then we write the JSON to it. Same thing, production code, you would want to put some checks around this and definitely add exception handling and everything else. But that's not the point of this demo. This demo is about profiling. So now this is a little handier to work with. We can see our resource type patient is here. And if we go ahead and just put this in our validator and hit validate, you can see it validated against patient and everything is okay. So technically it is a valid patient. Now we know it is not a valid US core patient because remember we have these each patient must-haves, right? So we have a set of things here that are added to be 1 star instead of 0 star, just so we can count on them as US core. So the trick here is, and I'll leave this up for just a second so we can see, this is why all of these nice IGs have this copy button here, is we're going to be copying a lot of URLs. And this, I mentioned this in the last video, but I am working on some tooling to make this easier because this is surprisingly painful at this point. So what we actually need to do here is in the patient, if we want to say that this is a US core patient, what we can do is make a new meta. And the meta on the on resources is just meta information. It has things like profiles you're claiming to support. It has the last update time of this resource. Again, should people choose to put those things in. And as usual, you can always come and find, if we look at hl7.org FHIR patient, we can go and find the meta tag on the patient. And you can see it has ID, metadata, implicit rules, languages, things like this. There we go. Resource metadata, last updated, source, profile, security, tags, all kinds of stuff. So what we want to do here is say we want a profile. And the profile is going to be a new, and we could do this either way. I prefer lists generally, even though it's kind of wasteful to be doing that here. And we're going to paste that value that we had. So this is the canonical URL of the US core patient profile. So in this case, it's nice because you can actually go and use that URL to find the US core patient. And that's for HL7, those will resolve and everything else. But really, this is just the identifier of this profile. So as long as we have something that indicates what this profile is and someone can figure that out in a FHIR server, then we're claiming support to it and we can go. So if we just run this now and get our output, so we can come here and look, we now have a patient and we can see that it does have this meta profile. Now the trick here is now that we've claimed support for this, if we go back to our validator, we'll go through some more validation things here once we have some errors to make it more interesting. And here we have those exactly those errors. So we can see that we wanted to go against the patient structure definition, which is correct, but then we started to claim we were from US core. And so what that does is it starts saying, okay, well, the patient gender is required in US core, the patient identifier is required in US core, and patient name is required in US core. So we can see here we're not meeting the requirements. Again, this is a very simple validator pattern that we can just paste in our resource and do everything. But as we're starting to work through this, it's already going to start getting tedious. So I want to show a couple of other options before we get too far. So if we look at the FHIR validation, I think we can search for FHIR validator and find the right thing. There we go. So we can look at the official FHIR validator. And here you can just download, it's a Java jar, and then there's documentation and a specification page that talks about what it actually does and how you use it and when you should use it. And what's nice, they even have an example here using wget 7-zip and then Java to validate something. So the trick here is we're going to need to download the specification as well. So we're going to download a couple of things. One is the Java jar. We just did that download, and I'll grab it here off screen in a second. And the other is we need this information because we want to validate against US core, but it doesn't necessarily know how to do that. Actually, you know what? We're going to double check. I think they might have added that to the Java validator. So we'll test that before we go too far in how many things we have to download. So I've downloaded the validator, and I'm going to go ahead and move it off screen just so that I don't show all of my computer stuff. Oops, and I did move instead of copy. So we want to make sure I keep my original copy of that. So we have a FHIR validator now. So I'm going to go ahead and open up another window here just so that I have something different. And we're going to look here where we say, what do we need to do? When we want to validate, we'll do the simplest validation and see what we get back. We're going to do Java minus jar, use that jar, and then the file and the version. So I think we're in the right directory. We can see here our patient.json. So I already have Java installed. We're going to use the validator CLI that's right here. We're going to use the patient JSON that's right here. And actually, it looks like it's just minus version. And I know that the version we want to validate against is 4.0.1. And we'll see if it downloads the profile or not. I can't remember if they added that. First run will take longer as it's going to do things. It's going and checking against terminology. So it did. Okay, perfect. So here, that terminology server that it mentioned in the output, I just want to call that out. The FHIR terminology, if you're not familiar, is things like when you want to use SNOMED codes or LOINC codes or different value sets like that that are not really things you can have just hard-coded in your standard. One is for licensing, but the other is just the size of the code system. There's instead of a FHIR resource server, you can have a terminology server that will go and expand those value sets and do the operations that you need it to do. And so it's using the terminology FHIR.org that's hosted for testing and development, and I think some people actually use in production. But we can see here it did figure out that hl7.fhir.us core. So it does have that since it's part of the FHIR packaging nowadays. And we can see that we got the same errors. And in fact, I believe the Inferno tool uses this underneath. So it makes sense that the errors are even in the same format. So we can see we can run this. Now this is a little better. Again, this is another step forward from the Inferno tool because we're not copying and pasting. So the Inferno tool is great for doing one-off validation. It's great for getting started. Obviously, we didn't have to install anything. We just brought up the web page and ran it. And I believe there is an API to do it. I haven't gone through that because I know that underneath we can just do this as well. So there's two options. A third option is, I'll pull up a web page for this since I lost all of my web pages from before. But there's a thing from FHIRly called the FHIRly terminal. And this can do validation as well. Since we're doing C#, we can do .NET things. And you can see this is actually, we click through to the right page, you can see you install it using a .NET tool install. So this is, for people who don't have Java installed, this is another great way to do it. The tool isn't focused on validation, like the Java one we just saw is just the Java validator. And so this has a lot of other pieces to it for communicating with FHIR servers and different things like that. But we can use it for validation as well. And so we will, let's see what happens. I already have that installed here. And what we need to do is actually, as far as resources, you push in, it has a stack internally that it uses. So what we can do is FHIR push patient.json, and then that is now on the stack. And I'm trying to remember what the validate command is off the top of my head. Does it do the help here? There we go. So there should be validate file, profile, push, all of these things. So first, let's try it just FHIR, validate, and I think I'm going to have to add the profile, but we'll add push and see what happens. So what this did is it pushed onto the stack another thing. So if we do FHIR show, we can see an operation outcome, and we can see it does not have a package lock file. So we need to do that. And I'm trying to remember how to do all of these things here. There we go, install a package. So if I'm correct, we can do something like this. Where is the package name? We saw it over here before too. That's a little easier. FHIR R4 core and this. So FHIR install this in our local directory, and it added that. And we should actually install, I don't know if this is by default or not, but we'll go ahead and try and add it and see what happens. Perfect. So now, let's see. Did that stay on the stack? It did. So we can FHIR up and then FHIR validates push again. And so this, now that we have those two packages installed, so we installed FHIR R4 and we installed the US core package, and let's try that again. This was working on Friday. I'm recording this on Monday. I ran out of time, so let's see. I think I might need to add the profile here. So let's add the rest of the command lines at once. And we can just grab this. And I think that's the piece I'm missing. Yeah, let's see. Give it a second. The joys of doing all this live. There we go. So now when we have this, perfect. We can see our operation outcome. And I don't know if I mentioned this, when you do validation, a lot of times you get this operation outcome. It's a FHIR resource that is used for exactly what we're talking about, operation outcomes. You can use them. A lot of FHIR servers will give you there's an option that you can say, for instance, if I'm creating a new resource, you can return the resource or you can return the operation outcome that tells me what happened when I did it. Just on a standard create, that's generally hopefully not useful because generally it should just come back with the resource. But especially when you start doing batches and transactions and some of these more complicated things, it's nice to get these that can outline several issues with severities and codes and all these things. This view here is just essentially that it's this indented view of saying here's the operation outcome. You can see we have 3 issues that are all errors, and we can see that we're missing these things that we need. So we have the Inferno test tool that we saw, the Java validator that we saw, and the FHIR terminal that we saw. What we're missing so far is still some way of doing this in code. And especially as we're playing with it here, that would be really nice to have. So now we come back to what we're going to need to do is download this package. So in US Core and in IGs in general, there's a downloads tab, and you can see that we can download this package. You can also go, if you don't want to download it from the IGs, you can go to, what's it, packages.phir.org, and then you can search for packages here and download them this way. So we could do like, it's formatted like that, US Core, and so you can see that there's a lot of different packages you can get. They have statuses, different things here. So in this case, since we have the web pages open, we can just download this one directly. So same thing, where I'll go grab this off screen from where I grabbed it, and we'll create a new folder called Profiles. Sure. And we'll put that in there. Now what it actually downloaded in this case is a tar gzip, and that's not going to be, there is actually I think a way to use them, but I prefer to just expand them so that we can see what's going on. Perfect. So we can see here we now have profiles, and then we have in this package folder, because that's what the packages always contain. And really what we should do is do something like US core, and we can put that, oops, other way around. We can put the package into US core. So now in profiles, we have US core, and then we have this package folder. And you can see this is all the computable artifacts that we needed from the profile. So if we come down to structure definitions, for instance, we can see there is a structure definition for a US core patient, which is terrible to read unless we beautify it. And this has all the same information that we were looking at in the nice rendered web page. This is just the official structure definition for it. So you can see all the text is derived from here. It has all the mapping information, it has all the elements and all the rules. And so that's what we need to validate against. So the next thing we need to do is actually add another NuGet package. And that's because by default, the C# libraries don't include all the validation because there's a bit more than we want. So what we're going to do is add, what is it, hl7.fire.specification.r4, I believe. Perfect. And again, if you're not sure on any of these things, you can always go to the NuGet gallery and look all these kinds of things up. So like here, if I come to, yeah, so if we just come to NuGet.org, we do something like FHIR, we can see there's a whole bunch of these different things. And then you can see there's like FHIR R4, that's one that we installed. And now we did the specification one. And you can see there's release notes and all the different things that we need. But in this case, this is additional support beyond the core to work with profiles, profile-based validation, publication, and things like that. And profile-based validation is exactly what we're trying to do right now. So this is kind of an advanced thing. So we're going to need to work through that. Perfect. So we have a couple of things to do in our code. We'll do this so that we can see more code. We're going to need to add something like profile directory. And not this one, we do need one here. So let's go ahead and add our param name for the profile directory. Directory containing expanded profile packages. And we're going to do the same thing here. Again, you don't want to hard code these kinds of things in reality, but in things like this, we can do that. So we'll have this same directory, profiles, that we added earlier. We know it's still failing. Let's leave that alone for a second. And we know we're going to want the serializer just so that we still have all these other things that we can do. But let's start adding what we need to do the actual validation in code. And the way that this is actually very thinly documented because it is kind of an advanced feature still. But again, I'm hoping to bring more tooling to make this a little easier. But in the meantime, we're going to go through and do what we want to end up with is this valid. Oops, we didn't ever add So we're going to want this validator object. And it's going to yell at us because we have not added this. So we just added, where is this? Oh, this is a serialization. Oh, validation. There it is. We were missing that. So we're going to need to create one of these. And to create this, we need a validation settings. So let's see what's in the validation settings. And in validation settings, there's actually quite a few things. Can we F12 this? We can. Perfect. So again, you can just hit F12 to go through and see the definitions of things. And this is all very well documented, so we can see what's here. But really what this is mostly about is about these resolving fields. There's different things about generating snapshots and FHIR paths and things. It's fun to look through and play with. But the key thing we're worried about is how we're going to resolve these things. How we're going to resolve the profiles when we tell it, again, like we said, this is the canonical URL. So we need our internal resolver to be able to figure out what this is. It's not going to just open up a web page and figure out how to do it. So we downloaded the profile, but we need to get that information in here. So for the validation settings, in this case, there's something called a resource resolver. And we're going to need to point that at our own resolver, which does not exist yet. So let's create that. We actually end up making an iResource resolver. And we'll just do that for a second. And you can see this is in, well, it doesn't autofill that one for us. So we'll add these. This is using hl7.fhir.specification and hl7.fhir.specification.source. So it should have figured that out if I didn't put a typo. There we go, I did have a typo. That's why I couldn't figure it out. Resolver. Let's see. Okay, so the trick here is we don't have anything. We know that this is the interface to a resolver, but we need to put something in there. And we're actually going to need two resolvers, but we want them in the same object. So the first thing, just as a good practice, we're going to make a cached resolver. And so that will tell everything internally cached if we're doing multiple resources. We don't want to go and load US core patient and things like that. Once we've used it once, we would want to reuse them. And then internally, we're going to make a multi-resolver. And this is just a way of saying, here, take these two resolvers and put them into the other resolver. So there's kind of a hierarchy here. Again, these are right now considered advanced topics. And so they're not as commonly used as things like the patient or the serializer. So they can be a little bit hard to work with at times, but that's okay. We're making progress. So the first one we're going to use is this zip source. And it's actually a very specific zip source called create validation source. And what this does is that NuGet package we added that has this one, that's the specification R4. It has not just the tools we need, the code we need to work with the specification, it actually has the R4 specification in a zip file. And so this special zip source create validation source says that's one of the things we want to use. We want to use the included specification.zip file that comes with this package. And that'll let us resolve things like an R4 patient. So the other thing we need to do is give it our directory. And so in this case, we need a directory source. And we need to give it the directory, which we have called profile directory. And we actually need to give it, now, here we can say true to include subdirectories. We'll go ahead and do it this way. So when we say true, it immediately yells at us because that's actually deprecated, and it's saying we should use directory settings. So we need a new directory source settings, and in that directory source settings, we have include subdirectories is true. Perfect. And as long as we get everything eventually set up, oops, and we add our new instead of trying to call this as a function, there. So now we have a resolver. We can tell our validation settings to use that resolver, and we can create a validator, but we want a validator using our validation settings. And I should probably be commenting this since it's demo tutorial code, and we'll take care of that in a minute here. I don't think everyone needs to see me typing all of those out. So now that we have a validator, we're going to go back and same thing. We're going to find this operation outcome. Operation outcome is what it's going to make. And instead of making a new one, what we're going to actually do is call validator.validate. And we need to give it our instance, which is our patient. So this will generate the operation outcome for us. And then we can go ahead and serialize this into JSON. Same thing before. We already have our JSON. And again, we probably should separate these out and make this. You know what? I'll do that. I can't quite go that far. So we'll have patient JSON and we'll have string operation JSON equals, and same thing we're going to do is serialize the string and our outcome. We want to use the same settings because we want it pretty. And in this case, I think we can just output it. We can write it as well. Let's write it as well. String outcome. Let's do the same format. Outcome JSON file name. And output JSON file of our operation out. Perfect. And we'll put it in the same directory. So outcome JSON file name, and instead of patient, we will call it outcome.json. So once we've serialized it, we can go ahead and write it. And we're going to put outcome JSON file name and operation JSON. And we'll put it on the screen too, so if we want to do it that way, we can. Right line, and we'll do, what is that? Operation JSON. And that should be outcome JSON. There we go. Keep everything consistent, even when we're just playing. So, in theory, now when we write this, when we run this, let's see what happens. We should get those same 3 errors. Perfect. And this is why we wanted the file. It's kind of big to read just here. So let's go ahead and open our patient and our outcome, and then we can get rid of that again. So our operation outcome, and you can see this looks very similar to the FHIR terminal, because the FHIR terminal is using the C# library, and it's generating the same exact thing. So we can see we still have our same errors, which is great, because now we can go and start addressing them. So the first thing is we can say we need a patient identifier. So this is pretty straightforward FHIR things here. Here we're just going to add an identifier. And that's actually going to be a list of identifiers because identifier is an array type. And then we'll make a new actual identifier. And the system can be example.org FHIR patient identifier, sure. and the value is ABC123. So we have our identifier. We could go ahead and get rid of multiple of these since we know what they are here. We know patient name is a required field. So let's go ahead and add a name, which is a list of human names, same thing. So we're going to create a new human name, and we'll just put in given test. That sounds reasonable. And we can go ahead and do patient gender, which is required. And oops, given, this is the, I always mix these up. Given is a new list of strings which has test in it. And then after name, we needed a gender instead. And this is administrative gender, and we'll do unknown. So that feels like it should pass. And we'll hit F5. So we'll rerun it, and we can see our operation outcome actually finished. And that is, oh, because it does have the given. Perfect. So if we want to, again, we can take this and run it through any of the other validators. I'm not going to run it through all of them, but just so we can see, if we go back to the Inferno test tool, we can see if we paste this in and say validate, we can see it comes back okay. So now we are pretty confident that we are properly using the profile, which is a great step. We have a bunch of ways of validating it. So we can do, via command line, we can do it via web page, we can do in our code, and that's all working perfectly. But so far, we're only using part of a profile. And that's to say we have the basic support, but I want to use some of these extensions that are here. So we're going to start with the simpler one here, which is the US core birth sex. And we can click through and look at the extension. And again, this comes back to the same thing. We're going to have to start copying these to add them. So again, I'm working on tooling here. It's a little complex, but should be hopefully available soon. But we want to add an extension to patient to add birth sex. So we look at our web page, we copy our URL, and we come back to our patient. Now, I'm going to put this under meta, and because I want to make sure that we're establishing our profile first, and then we can go and start adding extensions. Now, in this case, yeah, we can just create a new extension. Oops, I thought I copied that. And we have our US core birth sex extension. And we have this, we can put in the data type here. Now, it's not actually saying for the data type, it's just saying give me a value that is a FHIR data type. And this is one of the frustrating things here is this is a code. So we get no type hinting on extensions yet. And so that's one of the big things, I think, quality of life that I'm hoping to get in the next set. But we can see it is a code. And so here we can just, go ahead and put that code directly in. So we can say a new code, and the codes, if we follow through birth sex, we can find there's F, M, and unknown. So we'll go ahead and do unknown since that matches our administrative gender. And if we run this, we can see that it validated. Now, in this case, this value set is in the profile, so it's already expanded in here, and that's why it can validate without touching a terminology server. If we go through and look in the profile, we can find this value set expansion. It only has 3 values, and it's not too bad to add. And so that can validate. If we were doing something, again, like a SNOMED or a LOINC code or something like that, this validator, I don't know how it handles it because I haven't tried to do that. So I'll test that at some point here in the future. I need to find a profile that has a binding to one or resource. that I want. So, but that validation. But we can see we have our extension, we have our code, we have our URL. What I was referring to before is like this. If we run and we make a FHIR string instead of a code, this looks valid, right? As far as FHIR is concerned, this is valid. You know, it's not going to give you any sort of error. You can see we generated it, we serialized it. There was no error in any of that process. But value string is wrong. Since we're doing the validation, which again was a lot of extra step to set up, but now we can see it's yelling at us because code is incompatible with string, and so then we have this problem. But if we didn't do the validation, we would never actually see this. We could go ahead and create this, and we wouldn't know until we submitted it to a server that did validation and told us that it was wrong. And so when you start creating resources, if you have a client that's making any of these resources or a server that's making any of these resources, please, please, please go through and do validation on your processes. Obviously, you don't have to validate every single resource, but you do want to make sure that you've exercised everything here, you know, like a unit test type thing to say you're creating the right types and everything else. So we'll change that back to code, which you can see. Then our JSON comes back and we have a value code instead of a value string, and our validation passes. Perfect. So there's one more thing I want to touch on with extensions, and that we'll use a more complicated one. We'll use one of these complex extensions. And so we can pick US Core Race just because it's in the first slot here. And we're going to do something similar, but not quite the same. As we're looking at this definition, we can see for US Core birth sex, we just had an extension that has a code. When we have a complex extension like this, US Core Race, we can see we have an extension that has other extensions in it, and it's prohibited from having a value because it has other extensions. And so the way we're going to use it is going to be slightly different. So in this case, we can go ahead and this is the way I've preferred doing it here, is we're just going to create an extension that's going to be, we'll call it race extension. And we're going to create a new extension with our URL. And actually, we need to go ahead and give it specifically a null. And it should default, but let's be explicit in all of these things. Now that we have that, we can go ahead and start adding things to it. So race extension dot extension, and here we can actually create our list of extensions that go inside it. So if we're looking, and again, we need to come back and forth between these to pick up. But for instance, we have an extension called OMB category. So we're going to make an extension, and the URL is OMB category. And OMB category is a coding of one of these OMB race categories. And it's required. So we definitely need one of these. So we can see here, we have codes defined in this URN OID, and we have some codes here, and we have unknown. So we'll go ahead and grab one of these. Now this does not have the nice copy, which makes it a little harder, but we can grab that, and we can make a new coding, and the coding, the system is that OID that we grabbed, and the code will just grab the top one, which is American Indian or Alaskan Native. So that's one extension in it. If we come back, we can see we have a detail, we have a text. We'll just add one more, and we'll put that in the text, and we'll say So we want another new extension, and it's going to be text. And text is a value string. So that's a new FHIR string. And we'll say, what is this? This is our race default text. And in particular, the way this is structured is you might have 2 or 3 or 4 different OMB categories, and you might want to explain, or in here you might say, which specific, if you wanted to go into details, things like that. Now we can add this. Now we have this extension, so we can say add extension. Oh, can't do it that way. So just so that we say, if we say add extension, this is an overload shortcut, but it only has the URI, data type, value, and is modifier. So we can't add a complex extension that way. But we can just go to patient.extension and add our race extension. And once we've built this, we can see it validates properly, which is great. And we can see we have this patient going to this profile. We have our simple extension for the birth sex. And then we have this complex extension, which is the US core race with our OMB category, our coding, and our text that we added. And same thing, we can take this into the FHIR validator on the web page and run it through. And it should validate and come back with no errors, all okay. And we can also come back to all of our different, like the FHIR, the official Java validator, or the FHIR terminal, or whatever else we want, as long as it has these profiles. And there you go, terminology. We'll let it finish just because, there we go. All okay. So we're pretty confident that those are working. And I think that's a good place to break. Again, I'm hoping to make some tooling, finish up some tooling to make this process easier. There's a bit of tedium in copying these URLs, and you have to make sure you copy them exactly. And some of these extensions, getting some type hinting and things like that would probably be nice. So with that said, we'll end this video here. I'll comment this code before pushing it up to GitHub, but I won't make everyone sit here and watch as I do that. If you have any questions, comments, please let me know. If you like the video, please let me know as well. It helps, and if not, we'll see you next time. Thanks. Cheers.